followed by
Freedom SpaceX ring retraction complete, docking sequence holding for MCS reconfiguration.
Copy is holding for MCS reconfig. Copy is holding for MCS reconfig.
So confirmation that the soft capture ring, that first step in the docking process, has completely retracted. We will soon move into the hard capture process. Sounds like they're standing by for reconfiguration before doing so. But you can hear that the crew on Dragon are still speaking with the core here in Hawthorne, the crew operations resource engineer. So once they float into the hatch, they really become Expedition 2 crew members, not just crew 9 crew members, and they will start communicating once they float into the hatch. They really become Expedition 2 crew members, and they will start communicating as well here in Hawthorne with the core. That's the single person in the room that communicates with the crew. That keeps all of the communications streamlined, so you don't have a ton of different voices at different consoles.
He's been on the big MCS configured, proceeding with hook driving.
Station copies.
there's confirmation there that we are moving forward with that hard docking, and that we're talking over the big loop. So as you mentioned earlier, right now we're all communicating each team with different key personnel to minimize the amount of crosstalk that we have. But everyone can hear each other. The big loop does include mission control here in SpaceX, mission control Houston, the Dragon spacecraft, and the International Space Station.
And I can see that we do have those hooks starting to drive. There are two sets of six, so we'll have one set of six that will listen to before they start driving set, and that really secures the crew 9 is arrived at the space station.
And we're getting good views of crew 9 on your screen right now. Looking over their shoulders, displays obviously giving them information about their status as we continue to perform this hard sequence with the International Space Station.
And they're able to monitor the entire flight all the way from launch yesterday, 10:17 a.m. Pacific, 1:17 p.m. Eastern, all the way through the entire flight by watching those screens that you could see. Three monitoring screens, or three. There you go. So they have the opportunity to continue monitoring there. However, they also have the ability to take over and manually command spacecraft if they needed to. But we didn't see that on this flight. It was smooth ride uphill for Dragon all the way to docking station. Again, 7 minutes ago now. We are continuing to watch the hooks drive and secure us to the International Space Station.
Looks like we should have just about 5 minutes until we have confirmation of that hard docking. Currently expecting that at about 2:43 p.m. Pacific time.
Like I mentioned earlier, during this time, we keep any of the crew members that are on the space station from exercising. So any exercise that happens in space can impart load on the spacecraft itself. So those might be very small, but this is a pretty specific sequence. We want to make sure all hooks and latches go in the right place. And so they have to hold off from exercising for the time being. Crew members on the space station exercise for about 2 hours every day. That helps keep their bones and muscles strong. That way when they get back to Earth, they can recover much faster, and are able to walk immediately.
That's incredible. There's a lot of very exercise research going on board the International Space Station. As I understand it, including with a treadmill, a stationary bike, lots of different ways to keep them strong, even in microgravity before they make it back to Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's another one of those things that how important what we do on the space station also is for here on Earth, because what we've learned people who or their bones deteriorating without lack of exercise in orbit. We're using our bones and muscles just to stand here right now, but really don't when you're in space. So you have to do that continued exercise. So we're able to learn in space about exercise and the importance of it. We can also look to apply back here down on Earth people who struggle with osteoporosis as well.
There's a huge amount of crosstalk between microgravity research that's done both on board Dragon, whether it's through one of our NASA missions or commercial missions, and the International International Space Station all that benefit life here on Earth. Whether that's things like focused on phone health or even very specific disease pathways. It's interesting to give us that opportunity to look at different types of research that we can do for whether it's biological or nutrition. We talked a little bit earlier today about the number of plant experiments that are currently ongoing on board the ISS, all to study how we can deliver different amounts of nutrition to our astronauts on those future long-duration exploration missions. And of course, then there are parallels for that on Earth as well.
It's been 10 minutes since our docking today, and I see the first set of six hooks are now fully driven station, and the second set is now driving. So we are in the process of hard docking again. That takes about 10 minutes after docking, so we anticipate seeing that complete soon. But we did dock today, really right on the target time, 2:30 p.m. Pacific time, 5:30 p.m. Eastern time.
That's really incredible, too, because even though we mentioned it earlier, it bears repeating. We hit that 2:30 p.m. today because we had an on-time liftoff yesterday during an instantaneous launch window. This entire approach to the International Space Station is carefully...
SpaceX hard capture complete.
Oh, confirmation of hard capture. That's great.
Standing by for umbilicals as well.
Copy, hard capture complete.
Welcome aboard, Freedom.
Of course, now that Dragon has completed the docking sequence, the spacecraft needs to undergo a handful of checks, including hooking up that umbilical.
I know you've been waiting a while.
Just to see your smiling faces.
Once we get those checks complete, we'll obviously be able to get those crew members united on either side of Dragon and the ISS right now. But the crew on board Dragon now gets a chance to get out of their spacesuits before moving into hatch operations.
That's right, and things will be picking up inside the station too as NASA's Jeanette Epps gets the hatch on the station side ready to be opened. She's going to start pressurizing that area known as the vestibule between the Dragon and the station hatches. So we are standing by for confirmation of umbilical hard mate to the International Space Station, but we did hear both of those sets of hooks drove, and we are officially hard docked. So we are just standing by for umbilical.
Station on the big loop. We are standing down from Crew Dragon approach monitoring.
Houston copies.
And deconfigured work.
All right, again, we docked right on time here at 4:30 p.m. Central Time, 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time as Dragon and the International Space Station were flying over Botswana. And our teams in Mission Control Houston are continuing to monitor the arrival. So with Dragon docked, that's going to do it for us here in Hawthorne, but our coverage for Crew 9 will not stop here.
In a minute, we're going to toss it to Gary in Mission Control Houston to take us through that vestibule depressurization effort and hatch opening, when we'll see NASA astronaut Nick Hague and Roscosmos astronaut Alexander Gorbanov float into the International Space Station. But first, let's quickly recap how they got here. First, of course, we began with suit up with both of our astronauts and Crew 9 members putting on their IVA suits. Then they rode out to the launch pad for vehicle ingress. We had an on-time liftoff from Kennedy Space Center, pad 40, yesterday at 1:17 p.m.
Freedom SpaceX on the big loop. Docking sequence complete. Ground will be enabling hardline power and comm connection shortly. Go to DOF suits per procedure 4.012. We'll take cameras external.
SpaceX Freedom copies. A little bit broken there, but you're putting in hardline comm. You gave us a go for suit doffing.
Hey, from Nick, docking sequence is complete. We are enabling hardline power and comm connections. And concur, yeah, you can go ahead and doff your suits in 4.012. I will take cameras external.
Okay, copy that. We're starting to doff our suits, and you'll go external. Thanks.
confirmation from Mission Control there that we are go for suit doffing for our Crew 9 astronauts. Again, we are following up from a successful on-time launch yesterday from Space Launch Complex 40 at 1:17 p.m. Eastern. That was followed by a Stage 1 landing of our booster on Landing Zone 1. So that was a return to launch site landing, which we had great coverage of on our webcast if you want to take a look at that. That, of course, was followed by Dragon separation into a nominal orbit to set our Crew 9 team on their 28-hour journey to the International Space Station. We saw 5 major burns on board Dragon and then confirmed docking just a couple of minutes ago at 2:30 p.m. Pacific, 5:30 p.m. Eastern today, Sunday, September 29th.
And now that Crew 9 has arrived, we're turning our focus and looking ahead to the return of Crew 8. They're going to be taking you, or will be taking you, taking you. Taking you. Taking you. Taking you.
Aí, Falcon 9 com a missão Hera, dia 7 de outubro. E no dia 10 de outubro, a nossa querida Falcon Europa 9 com a missão Hera, 1h31 da tarde. E no dia 10 de outubro, aí, que é a mais esperada do missão Hera, 1h31 da tarde. E no dia 10 de outubro, aí, que é a mais esperada do missão Hera, 1h31 da tarde. E no dia 10 de outubro, aí,
I got a loud and clear, sir.
With that, I'm going to detach, and Alex and I will be both blazing displays, dolphin suits. With that, I'm going to detach, and Alex and I will be
All right, SpaceX copy that, Nick. For awareness, we're going to continue with our docking procedures, and our SpaceX copy that, Nick. For awareness, we're going to continue with our docking procedures. You step into 4.400 for docked cabin configuration. I'll keep you up to date when we do start vestibule press, but you can monitor vestibule pressurization and leak checks in section 4 of 4.400. How copy?
Copy all. You guys are going to start with vestibule pressurization here shortly. We're good to also step into the arrival config procedure, and we'll just run those in parallel with suit doffing.
All right, that's a good read back, Nick. And just let us know when you're done with suit doffing and if we are allowed to come back on board with cameras at any point in this docking sequence.
Yep, will do. Thank you.
This is Mission Control Houston, continuing our commentary after the docking of Crew 9 Dragon Freedom to the International Alexander Gorbanov, Haig of NASA, Gorbanov of Roscosmos, both docked to the International Space Station right on time, 4:30 p.m. Central Time, 2:30 p.m. Pacific. At the time, this station was flying 265 statute miles over Botswana. The crew on board Freedom now is going through the remaining procedures to get ready for hatch opening. Through the entire docking sequence, since docking is considered a dynamic event, as an extra set of precautions, the crew wears their launch and entry suits through the dynamic phase of flight of docking. The suits are a protective measure just in case of any pressure loss in the cabin throughout the entire sequence.
Station Houston on the big loop for pressurization and ingress part 1.
Go on 2.
Jeanette, you and Mike are go in step 1.1 of 2.102. Before you begin, we would ask that you please power on the Node 2 camera 1.
Copy, and where?
This is Mission Control Houston. We're covering the hatch opening operations after a successful docking at 4:30 p.m. Central Time. Crew 9 arrived aboard the International Space Station. Now it's just a matter of getting the hatches open to welcome the crew aboard the orbiting complex. Sequence of events happening on both ends of the hatches. On the Dragon Freedom side, NASA astronaut Nick Hague and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov are going through a series of sequences and steps to doff or take off their suits they used and wore as a protective measure through this dynamic phase of flight of docking. After taking off their suits, they'll also undergo a number of steps led by the Corps over in the Hawthorne Mission Control and SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California. The Corps there will be relaying steps up to the crew. We may hear those steps on the big loop. And those steps are closing out the cabin inside Dragon Freedom to prepare for the hatch opening sequence. This includes laying out the suits such that they can be dried, configuring the cabin displays and some of the equipment inside the cabin, as well as changing out some of the LiO canisters. These canisters allow for the scrubbing of carbon dioxide inside the cabin of Dragon Freedom. These are typical closeout procedures through every Dragon docking that we have undergone so far, just to make sure that Dragon procedures through every
0.01 minus 0.01. The cabin press hasn't changed. Want to be sure that's close enough to 0 to be 0.
We concur. That is close enough to 0 to be 0.
I will quote you on that. Thank you.
Capcom Tess Caswell here in Mission Control Houston. That's the voice you heard. Talking with NASA astronaut Matt takes a team to open board the International Space Station. It takes a team to open up the hatches, and we do have quite a crew inside that are closed. The protective. This is the hatch that's on the furthest position away from the International Space Station. That are closed right now is in the protective. This is the hatch that's Dragon right now is in the closest position away from the International Space Station. That position right now is in the protective. Hatch is what's called a vestibule. It's a gap between the two hatches of the International Space Station and Dragon. This is inside the vestibule. It's a interface between the two hatches of the adapter. It's just a gap. But that gap right now is inside the vestibule. It's an interface between the two hatches. Vacuum. The sequence now that the astronauts will undergo is pressurizing that vestibule up to match that of the cabins of the International Space Station as well as Dragon Freedom. The pressure inside each of those vehicles matches that of the pressure of Earth at sea level, 14.9 pounds per square inch. Appearing on the left side of your screen, another NASA astronaut, Butch Wilmore, who again, earlier today helped out with setting up the rendezvous and monitoring tools needed for Matt Dominic and Mike Barrett today to monitor rendezvous and monitoring tools needed. Crew 9's approach and docking to the International Space Station. procedures for hatch opening sequences do not need to be memorized by the astronauts on board. They do have reference material. NASA astronaut Jeanette Epps holding a tablet and referencing some of the step-by-step sequences that need to be followed to ensure a safe pressurization of the vestibule and the hatch opening sequence needed to welcome the Crew 9 astronaut and cosmonaut aboard the International Space Station. Teams aboard the International Space Station working with the flight control teams both in Hawthorne as well as here in Mission Control Houston. Through a docking sequence, the attitude control of the International Space Station itself is changed at various increments and spots through the docking sequence. As a visiting vehicle approaches the International Space Station, some of the thrusters and what are called desats, which allow the dampening of a control moment gyro to reset it once it reaches maximum rotation velocity, are disabled. And prior to a hard dock, the station is on control moment gyros only. The Attitude Determination Control Officer here in Mission Control Houston is reconfiguring the station's attitude control such that some of the attitude control assets are being re-enabled, including some of the desats and thrusters. Dragon Freedom and the International Space Station flying together over the Earth. We're now over an orbital daytime. Station and Dragon are approximately 260 statute miles northeast off the coast of Australia, just over the Coral Sea. We're a little more than 30 minutes after the docking of Dragon Freedom to the International Space Station. That docking again occurred at 4:30 p.m. Central Time, 2:30 p.m. 2:30 p.m. Pacific, 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Again, all the teams are working on the hatch opening operations. Commander Nick Hague and Mission Specialist Alexander Gorbanov inside Dragon, the view of which you can see right here, are undergoing suit doffing procedures, taking off their suits and configuring the Dragon cabin for the hatch opening sequence, including opening up of the Dragon hatch on their side. In the meantime, NASA astronauts inside the International Space Station are working on opening up the hatches on the station side. To the right of this view, where Dragon is currently attached to the station, is the International Docking Adapter that meets the two hatches, Dragon and International Space Station APAS hatches. And right on the right of your screen there, you can see the pathway on the right. That's down through the pressurized mating adapter, the black structure there on the left. You can sort of make it out, but on the towards the very back end of the pressurized mating adapter is a hatch. That's the one they're going to be working on opening. But first comes the pressurization of the vestibule in between the two hatches. That vestibule currently is at vacuum, and it's going to take some time to bring up to vacuum. In fact, it happens in a couple of steps. Right now, from vacuum, it needs to be brought up to 14.7 psi. It's not done in one swoop. It's done incrementally. First, it's brought up to 5 pounds per square inch and held there.
Freedom SpaceX for awareness. ISS power connection established.
As part of the docking sequence, the very last step prior to the docking sequence being completed is the deployment of an umbilical from the Dragon to the International Space Station. That umbilical connects the Dragon to pull from the power and connect the data through a hard wire in between the International Space Station and the Dragon Freedom. Dragon, until that point, has been operating its power off of the batteries on board as well as the solar arrays that are on the trunk, very apparent on the black section of the unpressurized trunk from the external view of the Dragon. Those have been providing power up until this moment, where we just confirmed through that big loop that the umbilical that connects the Dragon and International Space Station and allows Dragon to pull from the International Space Station's power, that's been completed and is in work. Dragon now on the International Space Station power, no longer needing to rely on the batteries and solar arrays. We're getting views, live views, from the International Space Station as it flies 257 statute miles over the Pacific Ocean. These views are cameras being set up and configured inside Node 2 by the NASA astronauts themselves to provide views from the station to us down here on the ground to monitor the operations. Of course, aside from opening up the hatches, will be a welcoming ceremony. We'll see the smiling faces of Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbanov enter into the International Space Station and be welcomed.
Freedom for a status.
Ready to copy.
Yeah, we started the 1-hour timer for the suit drying 8 minutes ago, and I am ready in section 3 with an inventory when you're ready to copy.
Okay, 1-hour timer 8 minutes ago, so we'll be looking for that in about 50 minutes to complete suit drying, and I'm ready to copy inventory.
Okay, for water, in bag 201, consumed 2 bottles. In 202, consumed all 5 bottles. In 204, consumed 5 bottles. All 5 bottles.
All right, we copy that. 2 bottle from 201, all 5 from 202, all 5 from 204.
That's a good readback, and that includes the flush bottle we're going to use here shortly. For food, we consumed everything in 303, 304, and 1 meal from 308.
All right, SpaceX copies. The water includes flush bottle, and then all food 303, all food 304, 1 meal 308.
That's a good readback. We're going to do the flush on the commode, and then I'll call down and let you guys come aboard.
SpaceX copies.
That report comes from Commander Nick Hague aboard Dragon Freedom. Dragon outfitted with the necessary consumables between 2 crew members. Those consumables are tracked and reported to ground teams, so the amount of food and water on board is known for the ride both uphill and downhill. The teams want to make sure that the astronauts have what they need, both for nominal situations and situations in which additional orbits may be necessary for a returning crew to Earth. That is carefully tracked by the ground teams in order to make sure the astronauts have what they need.
Station and Dragon Houston on the big loop. For awareness, we are configuring Dragon for hardline audio.
Okay, copy that.
Freedom copies.
Now again, there is an umbilical that connects Dragon Freedom to the International Space Station. We did talk about the power. That power connection is confirmed. Dragon is pulling power from the International Space Station, no longer needing to rely on the solar arrays and batteries aboard. The umbilical also provides a data connection. The audio on board Dragon and aboard the International Space Station to this point has been configured separately through a big loop configuration and a wireless configuration that is the common communication for visiting vehicles that was used between the 2 spacecraft. Teams are now working to use the hardline data path that's enabled by the umbilical connecting Dragon to the International Space Station. Comm checks on the hardline may be coming after that hardline is established. In the meantime, we continue to wait. Hatch opening operations are a game of patience. The vestibule again has been exposed to vacuum and the extreme thermal conditions of space, while the sun shines on it and is in a vacuum condition. The pressurization cannot proceed forward until some of those thermal conditions, which can introduce fluctuations into a reading of a pressure as it is brought up to the pressure of the International Space Station, they can fluctuate and provide a false reading of a leak. To counteract this, the teams simply wait.
Freedom, Houston, voice check on hardline comm.
Houston, Freedom, this got you loud and clear.
Copy loud and clear.
With that, the International Space Station Capcom Test Caswell has tested the hardline configuration enabled through that umbilical that connects Dragon Freedom to the International Space Station to the crew inside Freedom. Still on the big loop, although it's reconfigured for hardline communications, that's been successfully established.
Station Houston on 2 for the leak check. Heads up, we're expecting about another 5 minutes.
Okay, copy another 5.
As a reminder, as the vestibule is pressurized in between the station hatch and the Dragon hatch, to ensure that the leak check is solid, it's just a matter of waiting. The vestibule's exposure to vacuum prior to Dragon's arrival introduces thermal fluctuations that can give a false reading of a leak. So, when the vestibule is being pressurized, simply waiting can allow some of those thermal fluctuations to dampen out and get a very good reading of whether or not there is a leak on board. This is standard procedure with every docking to the International Space Station, of course, to this forward port. Just following procedures, allowing another few minutes to make sure that it's a good reading and there are no leaks before continuing to press for introducing more pressure into that vacuum space, that vestibule. Again, the target pressure that we're going for here is to match that of the International Space Station and Dragon cabins, 14.7 psi, pounds per square inch.
Station Houston on 2 for the leak check. We have a good leak check. You are go to step into step 3.1 of 2.102.
Copy 3.1 of 2.102 in order.
This is Mission Control Houston. Teams on the ground confirmed that they are happy with the leak check. The vestibule seems to look good. No leaks in between the two hatches. So the procedures that were referenced by the Capcom here in Mission Control Houston, that's Tess Caswell, the voice that you're hearing on the ground, are the steps needed to proceed with pressurizing the vestibule and turning the necessary valves and preparing the hatch for opening.
New sensation on 2. If you're happy with our DPDT, which we're showing 0.02, we'll proceed on your go.
Station Houston, we concur. You are go in 3.2.
Go in 3.2 in work.
NASA astronaut Matt and Dominic providing a read of what they're seeing inside the station of the pressure inside the vestibule. It's supposed to be pretty close to zero. International Space Station Flight Controller is pretty happy with the readout, so they're saying go to proceed. Again, this will be an incremental process to pressurize the vestibule in between Dragon and station.
And SpaceX Freedom in 4.400, we're complete through Section 5, standing by Section 6. And you can come aboard.
All right, SpaceX copies that. Freedom complete through Section 5, standing by in Section 6, 4.400. Brings cameras on board.
As the crew on board the International Space Station works through the steps to pressurize the vestibule in between the two hatches, the crew inside Dragon Freedom working on their closeout procedures and relaying to the flight control teams.
And station on 2 for a 3.3. GMT is 2229.
Copy 2229.
Right now we're in a expected for this shift of Crew 9's docking and welcome into the International Space Station. You can see there at the bottom of your screen, Flight Director leading the teams here in Mission Control Houston. Tess Caswell, to his right, is the voice from Mission Control. That position is called Capcom and relays the steps and communicates with the crew aboard the International Space Station, and will be the sole voice from here in Mission Control Houston, communicating with the crew aboard. And of course, pressurizing the vestibule. Now back with video from the International Space Station, continuing our coverage of the hatch opening sequence. The flight director for this shift of Crew 9's docking and welcome into the International Space Station. You can see there at the bottom of your screen, flight director leading the teams here in Mission Control Houston. Tess Caswell, to his right, is the voice from Mission Control. That position is called Capcom and relays the steps and communicates with the crew aboard the International Space Station, and will be the sole voice from here in Mission Control Houston, communicating with the crew aboard. Now back with video from the International Space Station, continuing our coverage of the hatch opening sequence. With a crew of Crew 9 enabling onboard video, we now have views from inside the cabin after docking. This is right now. NASA astronaut Nick Hague at the top of the screen. Just off to the right there, mission specialist Alexander Gorbanov, Roscosmos cosmonaut, two of them, are working through the procedures to open up the hatch, configure the cabin that you're seeing there inside Dragon, before opening up the hatch and entering the International Space Station. With a crew of Crew 9 enabling you see the suits that they wore for launch as well as docking after docking. This is inside Dragon are in the seated positions. Right now they're in a configuration such that they can be dried just off to the right there, in between use. Roscosmos cosmonaut, two of them. Aside from the next dynamic operation, which will be undocking for the Crew 9 crew, they may perform a series of tests with the suits, but otherwise their mission now will be converted from Crew 9, the transit from Earth to the International Space Station, to join the mission of Expedition 72, which is continued science, research, and discovery aboard the International Space Station. Right now they're in a configuration such that they can be dried in between use. Aside from the next dynamic operation, which will be undocking for the Crew 9 crew, they may perform a series of tests with the suits, but otherwise their mission now will be converted from Crew 9, the transit from Earth to the International Space Station, to join the mission of Expedition 72, which is continued science, research, and discovery aboard the International Space Station. Now getting views from the two spacecraft. Again, there is a hatch, multiple hatches actually. We are seeing that the A-Pass hatch is open on the International Space Station side. The vestibule in between the two spacecraft have been pressurized to meet that of sea level on the ground. Now getting views from the two spacecraft. Again, the position where Hague and Gorbanov currently are very close to the Dragon hatch. Now with the A-Pass hatch opened, some of the flashes you were seeing from inside the pressurized mating adapter or cameras, and the flashes of the cameras to inspect the hatch, make sure there's no foreign object debris, just a safety measure and precaution to make sure that nothing is in the way. That will be documented and relayed to the ground for inspection, make sure everything's good. Some of the many steps of these hatch opening procedures that we've been referencing. To meet that of sea level on the ground. The position where Hague and Gorbanov currently are very close to the Dragon hatch. Now with the A-Pass hatch opened, some of the flashes you were seeing from inside the pressurized mating adapter or cameras, and the flashes of the cameras to inspect the hatch, make sure there's no foreign object debris, just a safety measure and precaution to make sure that nothing is in the way. That will be documented and relayed to the ground for inspection, make sure everything's good. Some of the many steps of these hatch opening procedures that we've been referencing. This is Mission Control Houston following along. Again, the APAS hatch is open. This is the last hatch on the International Space Station side. There's one more hatch to go, and that's on the Dragon side. Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbanov currently waiting patiently inside Dragon Freedom, going through their incremental steps to make sure the hatches can be opened at a safe time. You saw the NASA astronauts in the pressurized mating adapter bring in white cloth. This is part of the procedures of outfitting the hatch for ingress. The hatch itself is metallic and has been exposed to vacuum. As a safety measure, the hatch itself is being covered with this white cloth. There's also a docking fixture that's used. It's sort of a pole that sticks out from the back end of the APAS hatch that has been removed, as it is an obstacle to crews ingressing through that hatch. Working through the steps incrementally. The crew seems to be on the timeline right now, so we're expecting the hatch opening to happen within the next 30 minutes or so of Dragon. Right now we're looking at a gap in our video coverage from the station. That's used, sort of a pole that sticks out from the back end of the APAS. Hoping to beat that gap so we can see some of the crew members enter. But we will be providing continuous coverage through that hatch opening and when the crew are formally welcomed on board the International Space Station. There will be a formal ceremony. In this shot that you're seeing right now, you can actually see the bell, ceremonial bell, which will be rung upon the ingress of the two crew members on board Dragon Freedom, welcoming them and joining Expedition 72, rounding out 11 members of 72. Hoping to beat that gap so we can see some of the crew members enter. But we will be providing continuous coverage through that hatch. Three-box view that you're seeing from inside the station on the bottom right, inside Dragon, bottom left. Again, NASA astronaut Nick Hague on the top right corner of the screen. From that Dragon cabin view, Gorbanov you see behind some of the seats on the view from the bottom left. And we are seeing Dragon illuminated by the sun a little bit until an orbital sunset. As expected just minutes from now, the views on the outside of station will become a little darker as the station and Dragon pass 260 statute miles over the northern Atlantic Ocean. From inside the station on the bottom right, inside Dragon, bottom left. Again, NASA astronaut Nick Hague on the top right corner of the screen. From that Dragon cabin view, Gorbanov you see behind some of the seats on the view from the bottom left. And we are seeing Dragon illuminated by the sun a little bit until an orbital sunset. As expected just minutes from now, the views on the outside of station will become a little darker as the station and Dragon pass 260 statute miles over the northern Atlantic Ocean. More Expedition 72 crew members starting to come into view. In the red shirt there on the left, Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexei Ovchinin, former crewmate of Nick Hague. On his Soyuz flight to the International Space Station, they rode together aboard a Soyuz to the International Space Station and joined for their expedition before returning, now reunited in space.
Houston Station on the big loop. Step 4.8 is complete. Step 4.9 station is ready for Dragon hatch equalization.
72 crew members starting to come into view.
We copy, Mike. We are not quite ready on our side. We'll let you know when we are.
Former crew
Holding at 4.9.
Soyuz flight to the International Space Station. They rode together aboard a Soyuz.
Mike Barrett relaying that the crew is ready for hatch equalization, doing a few things on the ground.
SpaceX Freedom on the big loop. Cruise holding in 4.9. We're ready for the hatch to come open.
4.8 is complete. Step 4.9 station is ready for Dragon hatch equalization.
We copy, Mike. We are not quite ready.
All right, SpaceX copies. We'll be waiting for the ground to be ready for equalization, and that's going to keep us in section 6 of 4.400. You'll see us take commands and the state change in step 6.2 when we're ready to go.
Ready for hatch equalization, doing a few things on the ground.
SpaceX Freedom on the big loop. And copy that. And just a question on estimate on how long that'll take. We're coming up on our hour of drying time. Now check that. We got 15 minutes. We'll just wait.
All right, SpaceX copies. We'll be waiting for the ground to be ready. Copy. Yeah, we're still a few minutes away from stepping into equalization, and we're tracking about just over 14 minutes left in dry time. We'll see if those deconflict, but we won't let the suit drying stop us from proceeding if we're already ready to step into that.
And copy that. And just a question on copy all. Estimate on how long that'll take.
And Houston on the big loop. The APAS hatch seals look great, and no condensation noted. We did take a picture of the docking cross. That also looks great.
Now check that. We got 15 minutes.
Houston copies.
Copy. Yeah, we're still a few minutes away from stepping into equalization, and we're tracking about just over 14 minutes left in dry time. We'll see if those
Crew aboard Station and Freedom eager to open up that hatch. Just need to make sure everything's set on the ground. Teams are carefully analyzing all the data to make sure they are ready for that hatch equalization. In the meantime, you saw the crew did an inspection of the APAS hatch, the one that's open there in the background, just on the far end of the pressurized mating adapter. That has again been outfitted for safety precautions with cloths. The docking cross has been removed, an obstacle from egress. In addition to noting and inspecting the APAS hatch, taking photographs for the ground to analyze, the crew did report that the APAS hatch looks great. Good news.
Teams are carefully analyzing all the data
And allows for the teams to continue towards an on-time opening of the hatch and welcoming of the crew aboard the International Space Station.
Just on the far end of the pressurized main
Again,
adapter.
Haig in the background of the Dragon cabin shot. Gorbanov there in the foreground.
An obstacle
Aboard in Node 2, International Space Station on the right, NASA astronaut Don Pettit, part of the Soyuz crew that recently arrived aboard the International Space Station, commanded by Alexei Ovchinin.
Good news. And allows for the teams to continue towards an on-time opening of the hatch.
Ovchinin there, of course,
Aboard the International Space Station.
former crewmate of Haig. They launched together aboard their Soyuz mission to the International Space Station and will be reunited at the welcoming ceremony.
Gorbanov there in the foreground. Aboard in Node 2, International Space Station on the right, NASA astronaut Don Pettit, part of the Soyuz crew that recently arrived aboard the International Space Station, commanded by Alexei Ovchinin.
Haig and Ovchinin did, of course, have an abort after the launch of their Soyuz MS-10 mission. But both of them did get to go up and join the crews of Expedition 59 and 60, launching successfully aboard Soyuz MS-12 and completing their expedition aboard the International Space Station and safely returning to Earth. Again, the two reunited in space.
Haig and Ovchinin did, of course, have an abort after the launch of their Soyuz MS-10 mission. But both of them did get to go up and join the crews of Expedition 59 and 60, launching successfully aboard Soyuz MS-12 and completing their expedition aboard the International Space Station and safely returning to Earth. again, the two reunited in space.
Three Roscosmos cosmonauts in view. On the view on the right, who recently came through the pressurized mating adapter, was Ivan Wagner, Alexei Ovchinin, now making his way through pressurized mating adapter. Alexander Gurbankin currently taking the frame in the black shirt. All Expedition 72 crew members will be present when Nick Hague and Alexander Gorbanov ingress the International Space Station. It's part of a formal welcoming ceremony. We'll continue our coverage until
On the view on the right,
an opportunity to provide remarks during that ceremony.
The pressurized mating adapter was Ivan Wagner, Alexei Ovchinin.
Right now, again, the Node 2 hatch
Pressurized mating adapter.
in the foreground of this view, as well as the APAS hatch, both on the International Space Station side that's in the background, much further into the pressurized mating adapter. Both of them are open.
72 crew members will be present.
As the teams in space now, both on the International Space Station side as well as the Dragon side, both ready for opening up the final hatch.
Formal welcoming ceremony. Teams have an opportunity to provide remarks during that ceremony. Right now, again, the Node 2 hatch in the foreground of this view, as well as the...
So again, the astronauts in space are ready to go, just waiting for those ground teams and finding ways to pass the time.
Station and Dragon Houston on the big loop. Stand by for equalization. We're expecting it to take 3 to 4 minutes.
On the International Space Station side, as well as the Dragon side, both ready for opening up.
Hey, copy that. Jim copies.
So again, the astronauts in space are ready to go, just waiting for those ground teams and finding ways to pass the time.
Station and Dragon Houston on the big loop. Stand by for equalization. We're expecting it to take 3 to 4 minutes.
Hey, copy that. Jim copies.
This is Mission Control Houston. For those tuning in, we're continuing to wait for one last step of allowing the hatch pressure to equalize before opening up the final hatch. We've been working through hatch opening sequences over the past hour or so, about an hour and a half since docking at 4:30 p.m. Central Time. The ground teams have instructed the astronauts on board to wait until equalization is achieved before proceeding to open up with the hatch. Hoping to hear that call momentarily. This is a view from inside Dragon Freedom.
For those tuning in, we're continuing to wait.
NASA astronaut Commander Nick Hague in the background there on the comms.
Pressure to equalize before
Mission specialist Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov there in the foreground.
Over the past hour or so, about an hour and a half since docking at 4:30 p.m. Central Time. The ground teams have instructed the astronauts on board to wait until equalization is achieved before proceeding to open up with the hatch. Hoping to hear that call momentarily. This is a view from inside Dragon Freedom. NASA astronaut Commander Nick Hague in the background.
Mission Control Houston.
On the
For those
comms.
tuning in,
We're mission specialist Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov there in the foreground. Continuing to wait for one last step of allowing the hatch pressure to equalize before opening up the final hatch. We've been working through hatch opening sequences over the past hour.
This is Mission Control Houston. You're getting views from both inside the Dragon Freedom cabin as well as from inside the International Space Station Node 2.
Docking at 4:30 p.m.
Astronauts on board both vehicles waiting patiently. We're waiting for a go from ground teams analyzing the pressure inside each of the respective spacecraft and waiting for a go to open up that last hatch, Dragon hatch.
View from inside Dragon Freedom. NASA astronaut Commander Nick Hague in the background there.
You're getting
on the
views
comms.
from both inside the Dragon Freedom
Mission
cabin
specialist
as well as from inside the International
cosmonaut
Space Station Node 2.
Alexander Gorbanov there in the foreground.
Freedom SpaceX for suit dry.
Patiently, we're waiting for a go from ground teams analyzing the
Freedom's with you.
inside each of
All right,
the
we're
respective
happy with the suit dry timer now, so you are go for commanding the suit fan off before we step into hatch opening.
Okay, copy that. We'll turn off the suit fan.
Freedom SpaceX for
See NASA astronaut Nick Hague working on the displays, the console there inside Dragon Freedom.
All right, we're happy with
The command to disable those suit fans is on that console.
The suit fan off before we step into hatch opening.
Suit fan and suit drying procedures are done after doffing suits through various phases of space flight. For these two astronauts, after doffing the suits after orbital insertion, suit drying was part of the procedures there as well, before they were once again donned prior to the approach initiation burn. Those suits were doffed again after the docking sequence was complete. That includes a soft capture.
Freedom SpaceX on the big loop. We see those suit fans are off, so at this time you are go for hatch opening per the decal, followed by the remaining actions in 4.400 section 6.
Suits through various phases of space flight.
Copies. We're going to open the hatch per decal, and then the remaining steps in section 6, 4.400.
Good, readback, and we'll just follow up after hatch open on the completion of 4.012 as well, but we can go ahead and step into the hatch hops.
Those suits were Mission Control Houston.
Okay, copy that.
Getting views from both inside that includes a Dragon Freedom cabin as well as from inside the International Space Station Node 2.
So at this time, you are go for hatch opening.
Astronauts on board both vehicles.
With that from the SpaceX Mission Control teams in Hawthorne, California, relaying that the suit fan command has been successfully initiated and they are go to open up the hatch. We got a great view from inside the space station here, and we're starting to see it illuminate.
4.012 as well, but we can go ahead and step into the hatch hops.
Copy that. Okay, copy that.
And now, with that, we confirm Dragon hatch is open. 6:04 p.m. Central.
SpaceX Mission Control teams in Hawthorne, California. SpaceX Mission Control teams in Hawthorne, California. Suit fan command has been successfully initiated, and they are go. Suit fan command has been successfully initiated, and they are go to space station here. And we're starting to see a great view from inside the space station here, and we're starting to
SpaceX
see
Freedom hatch is open.
Copy, hatch open.
Freedom arriving.
And now, with that, we confirm.
The bell has been rung. Alexander Gorbanov, the first through of Crew 9, being welcomed by Expedition 72. Next up is Crew 9 Commander Nick Hague. Crew 9 now aboard the International Space Station and joining Expedition 72.
SpaceX Freedom hatch is open.
Copy, hatch open.
SpaceX Freedom hatch is open.
Copy, hatch open.
Freedom arriving. Freedom arriving.
The bell has been rung. Alexander Gorbanov, the first through. The bell has been rung. Alexander Gorbanov, the first through of Crew 9. Next up is Crew 9 Commander Nick Hague. 72. Next up is Crew 9 Commander Nick Hague. Crew 9 now aboard the International Space Station and joining Expedition 72. Now aboard the International Space Station and joining Expedition 72.
Again, Crew 9 on board the International Space Station. That ingress coming shortly after the hatches were opened at 6:04 p.m. Central Time, being welcomed by the crew of Expedition 72. We're going to continue our coverage here. We have a planned formal welcoming ceremony. However, we are coming up on an expected gap in our video communications from the International Space Station.
Crew 9
So just as the crew was patient with the hatch opening operations, we will be patient with the crew, setting up for the welcome ceremony when we recover that video. Just around shortly after 6:30 p.m. Central Time.
We have a planned We're going to continue our coverage here. Welcoming ceremony. We have a planned formal welcoming ceremony. However, we are coming up on an expected gap in our video communications from the International Space Station. So just as the crew was patient with the hatch opening operations, we will be patient with the crew, setting up for the welcome ceremony. For recover that ceremony video. When we recover that video, just around shortly after 6:30 p.m. Central Time. Shortly after 6:30 p.m. Central Time.
Again, Haig and Gorbanov on board the International Space Station. Gorbanov in frame right now, but they're going to take some time and speak with some of their crewmates. But we will be continuing our coverage through the formal welcoming ceremony. There is an expected gap in our video communication from the International Space Station. So we'll continue our coverage until that video is regained.
Again,
begin our coverage of the welcome ceremony shortly after we regain that coverage, expected just around 6:30 p.m. It'll take some time for the crew to get set up and in position. We'll do a couple of technical checks and be right on our way.
Speak with some of their crewmates.
But in the meantime, stay tuned for the formal welcoming ceremony of Crew 9 to join Expedition 72.
Through the formal welcoming ceremony, there is an expected gap in our video communication from the International Space Station. There is an expected gap in our video communication from the International Space Station until that video is regained. So begin our coverage until that video is regained. Shortly after we regain that coverage, begin our 6:30 coverage of the welcome ceremony. It'll take some time after we regain and in position. That coverage, we'll do a couple of technical checks and be right on our way. It'll take some time for the crew to get set up. In the meantime, stay tuned. We'll do a couple of technical checks ceremony and be right on our way. Of Crew 9 to join Expedition 72. But in the meantime, stay tuned for the formal welcoming ceremony of Crew 9 to join Expedition 72.
Now in a short handover of our video and audio from the International Space Station as expected. This was tracked before we initiated a go to proceed with the formal welcome ceremony. Wanted to make sure we got good views from inside. This handover is expected to last a couple of minutes before we regain views from on board, and we'll go through a couple of steps setting up for good scenes before proceeding with the welcome ceremony itself. Teams in Mission Control Houston have been led by Flight Director Marcos Flores, coming on console prior to the joint operations, just prior to the approach initiation burn, and following along all the way through docking, which happened right on time today, 4:30 p.m. Central Time. From inside, the crew then proceeded to close out the Dragon cabin, doff their suits, and get ready to enter the International Space Station.
In 2.102, step 6.1, IMV duct installations complete. Your go for IMV fan activation.
Mission Control Houston have been led.
Houston copies, Nick. Thanks.
Flight Director Marcos Flores, coming on console prior to the joint operations, just prior to the approach initiation burn, and following along all the way through docking, which happened right on time today, 4:30 p.m. Central Time. The crew then proceeded to close out the Dragon cabin, doff their suits, and get ready to enter the International Space Station.
In 2.102, step 6.1, IMV duct installations complete. Your go for IMV fan activation.
Houston copies, Nick. Thanks.
Getting views from on board the station now. Before the formal welcome ceremony, just getting a head start on some of the procedures. Around the welcome ceremony, stowage of some bags, closing out the Dragon cabin. The communications from on board might be a little spotty, which is why we're holding on executing the welcome ceremony for now. We'll again continue our coverage until that's done, but we may lose some views here and there until we get solid communications expected just in about 10 minutes. Getting views from on board the station now. Before the formal welcome ceremony, just getting a head start on some of the procedures. Around the welcome ceremony, stowage of some bags, closing out the Dragon cabin. The communications from on board might be a little spotty, which is why we're holding on executing the welcome ceremony for now. We'll again continue our coverage until that's done, but we may lose some views here and there until we get solid. The two Dragon commanders now inside Freedom. Commander Nick Hague inside the Dragon that he just took to the International Space Station with mission specialist Alexander Gorbanov as part of Crew 9. Matt Dominic, the commander of Crew 8. Today begins a 1 week long handover period to set Crew 9 up for success as they join Expedition 72 and continue a long duration stay aboard station of science and discovery. NASA astronaut Matt Dominic, commander of Crew 8, the two Dragon commanders now will wrap up his stay aboard the International Space Station and as part of Expedition 72, and he, along with his Crew 8 cadre, including Mike Barrett, Jeanette Epps, and Alexander Gurbankin, will take their SpaceX Dragon back to Earth, splashing down off the coast of Florida. That Dragon is Dragon Endeavour, currently docked to the zenith side, or the space-facing side of the International Space Station. As expected, communications are a bit spotty. We're losing video incrementally from the International Space Station. Should be a little bit more steady about 10 minutes from now, maybe less than 10 minutes. Again, this is a live view from the International Space Station Flight Control Room. Teams here have been overseeing Dragon's approach and docking.
Freedom. I was just looking for a go to get into location 23 and cover up my LIO before the timer expires.
Off the coast of Florida. That Dragon is Dragon Endeavour, currently docked to the zenith side, or the space-facing side of the International Space Station. As expected, communications are a bit spotty. We're losing video incrementally from the International Space Station. Should be a little bit more steady about 10 minutes from now, maybe less than 10 minutes. Again, this is a live view from the International Space Station flight control room. Teams here have been overseeing Dragon.
Teams in this room, again, as part of Orbit 3. The shifts in this room are 24/7.
Location 23 and
So 3 shifts per day, every day of the year, making sure that astronauts aboard the International Space Station, who have been there continuously for coming up on 24 years, making sure that they have everything they need and they're well looked after. And it's from this room that it happens. Marcos Flores is the flight director overseeing the operations today from approach and docking.
On 2 for Nick, we are go for step 6.3.
Teams in this room, again, as part of Orbit 3.
Copy, go for 6.3. Thank you.
24/7.
Commander Nick Hague of Crew 9, NASA astronaut, proceeding with some of the closeout duties of the Dragon cabin ahead of our welcome ceremony. Again, Marcos Flores is the flight director today. On the bottom of the screen, Tess Caswell is the voice from here in Mission Control up to the crew. She's the one communicating from Houston up to the crew.
Flores is the flight director overseeing the operations today from approach and docking.
On 2 for Nick, we are go for step 6.3.
Copy, go for 6.3. Thank you.
Commander Nick Hague of Crew 9, NASA astronaut, proceeding with some of the closeout duties of the Dragon cabin ahead of our welcome ceremony. Again, Marcos Flores is the flight director today. On the bottom of the screen, Tess Caswell is the voice from here in Mission Control up to the crew. She's the one communicating from Houston up to the crew.